Hello all, if you're just joining us, you are in the session on a simulation for rapid response communications. The warm-up activity is to go ahead and read the training index, which is in the chat box. And here is the link again. So I see Diana has a question on that, so I'm going to drop it in again. And that document will get you oriented today's session to give you a little bit of background and talk through how it's going to be structured. I will be repeating all of this in the session, but it also includes this link to a spreadsheet, which is very important that you use to sign up for a team. Today's session is going to be an interactive activity, so you'll need to be in a team in order to participate. So go ahead and use that spreadsheet link to sign up for a team that you'll be working with. Just drop your name into the next available cell. While folks are getting themselves sorted into teams, we're gonna go ahead and push forward. You'll have time to keep doing that. I'm just gonna give you some information to get you set up. So let's go ahead and flip to the next slide. So if you are here for a simulation on rapid response communications. This is Rethink's third time presenting this training at Netroots. We are very excited to be here with you today. It's one of our favorite sessions to do with folks. If you have any questions throughout today's session, please go ahead and either use the Q&A box, or if you're having any tech issues, just post them into the chat and our wonderful volunteer is going to assist you. Again, if you have not yet opened that index sheet, go ahead and open it up, as well as that spreadsheet link so you can sign up for a team. Those are going to be your guiding documents throughout today's session. So a couple introductions for us, so you know who your trainers are. My name is Firdaus. I am a senior media associate at the Rethink Media, and my role involves assisting organizations working with Muslim, Arab, Sikh, and South Asian communities with their communication strategy and their media relations needs. I specifically work with arts and culture organizations to change the narrative about those communities in the media. And my co-trainer today is Yasmin, and I will have her introduce herself.
Hi, all. My name is Yasmin, and I am a media associate on the Rights and Inclusion team at Rethink Media. And I work with over 80 different organizations and a coalition to uplift their voices, specifically Muslim, Arab, Sikh, and South Asian communities in the media. And I have had the wonderful opportunity of training over 170 trainees to increase their voice share in mainstream media.
So this training is built from our experience at Rethink with responding to crises that impact the communities that we just shared. Each of the spikes that you see in this graph represent a crisis that's happened to our communities and that our organization has helped communities respond to. So you can see that over the past 4 years, we've seen a rise in the number of incidents that this particular set of communities has responded to. And so we have developed a model for effective crisis communications response, which is what we're going to be sharing with you today. So we only have 50 minutes together, and this training does move quite quickly. But rather than tell you how to do crisis communications, we're going to learn experientially so that you can walk away knowing how a crisis unfolds and what you need to do in order to effectively respond. So we want you to use this training to inform how you would respond to a crisis in whatever issue area that you work on. And the focus is really on the mechanics rather than the specific content. So we have two objectives today. The first is to learn how to work rapidly under pressure to respond to a crisis. And the second is to provide you the tools to prep your organization for future crises. So today's session is structured, as you can see from our title, as a simulation. We're going to put you through a scenario that's based on real world events and have you work in teams, particularly now where we have to work virtually, so that you can practice doing that in a safe environment. Okay, so if you have not already, there is this worksheet, which is what I've been referencing earlier. I'm going to drop the link again into the chat box. Please, please make sure that you sign up for a team, because otherwise you cannot fully participate in today's activity. We will not be talking at you for the rest of the session. So everyone needs to sign up for a team. You can just go ahead and drop your name into the next available cell. So if team 1 is full, then just go on to team 2. Your team will determine the worksheets and stuff that you'll be working on together. So while you go ahead and do that, let's talk about what the scenario looks like. We have cooked up quite a scenario for you to practice with, and all the instructions are going to be in the worksheet that I'm going to drop in just a moment. So don't worry about having to write any of this down. We're going to spend the next 30 minutes in a simulation of a crisis where you will role play the staff of a DC-based human rights organization. There will be 3 rounds in the simulation, which each represent one real world phase of the scenario. We're going to give you 8 minutes with your team to work on that phase in a shared Google Doc, again, which I will share in just a moment. Your task during each of those phases is to make a list of all the actions that you would focus on during that moment in the crisis. If you have time as you're working together, please rank each item in your actions by priority and assign them to a staff role at the organization. Again, that information is going to be listed on the document. If there are folks who keep trickling in as the training goes on, it will be your responsibility to catch them up to what's happening. And that simulates what it's like in the real world if you have a colleague that's away at an external meeting, or for instance, if someone was on vacation and came back in the midst of a crisis that's multi-day, you have to catch them up to what's happening and fold them into how the rapid response is happening. So at the end of each round, we will make an announcement that moves the scenario forward to the next phase. And there will be a different document for you to work on the next phase. If you're going to list anything about messaging as part of your actions, do not worry about writing specific talking points. I don't want you to think about how you would have to wordsmith things, but I do want you to think about what would inform how you message about the crisis. Once we end the simulation, we're going to come together and discuss what we learned, and we will share some resources that you can take home with you to prep your own organizations to do any rapid response. If you have any additional questions after the training wraps, we will share our contact information so that you can reach out to us directly and see how we can assist you. All these directions that I just shared are on the worksheet, so it will be in front of you in text form, so you don't have to worry about remembering all this. Do you have any questions in the meantime? If you do, please go ahead and use that Q&A box to let us know. And while you do that, we are going to drop in those links, and we are going to share the first update. So the worksheets are now available in that spreadsheet, which is right here. It should be in the chat box. I'm re-upping it again. So go ahead and use that spreadsheet to access the Google Docs. I know it's a little complicated, but it's hard when we're doing a webinar form. If it's a meeting, it's a lot easier. Since you cannot talk to each other using your mics, we encourage you to use the chat feature inside of Google Docs, which is indicated right here, to communicate with your team members. That way you can figure out what you want to do together and chat with each other in real time. Now I'm going to turn it over to Yasmin to let us know what our simulation scenario is.
Thanks for those. So let's set the scene. It's 7 days before the election, and there are media reports that the Trump administration says it has conducted drone strikes against ISIS and al-Shabaab militants. According to Trump, they were planning to disrupt the election by attacking infrastructure in several states. So for the first update, it's the morning after the drone strikes, and Trump tweets out, "Big disruptions planned. We dominated the jihadist terrorists. Can election results be trusted?" and shortly followed by weak Michigan governor can't protect mail-in ballots from ISIS. In the US, there are reports of federal officers in camouflage, but no agency identification or badges driving unmarked non-government rental cars. They approach and sometimes detain Muslims and others in low-income communities in Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Florida. So we will go ahead and give you 8 minutes to work with your team in that Google Doc. And if you have questions throughout, logistical questions, we will help you. Just go ahead and drop that in the Q&A box, but we won't be answering any content-related questions until the end. So let's go ahead and start that for 8 minutes. And if you are just coming in, please use the link that is in the chat box to sign up with the team and dive right in.
Just a quick note that you have about 4 minutes left in this round, so you're about halfway through. And we will give you the next announcement in a few minutes.
All right, y'all. So that is time for update 1. Let's go ahead and jump into update 2. So it's election night at 2 a.m. Florida and Michigan are both too close to call and will take several days to recount. Several other states have already warned that due to new mail-in ballot procedures, their results will take a week to tally. What results we have leave Biden and Trump neck and neck in the Electoral College. And there are reports of post-election violence in Michigan, Florida, and Minnesota. For those, we'll be dropping in the second update Google document into that spreadsheet, and you will have 8 minutes to work with your team to list out the same procedure as update 1, but apply it to update 2. And we will be back in 8 minutes. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them into the Q&A chat, and we will help you as much as we can.
All right, folks, this is your 2-minute warning for this round. And if anyone's just joining us, I have dropped in the spreadsheet link so that you can sign up for a team. That's what we're up to right now. Folks are working together in teams to respond to this activity. So again, you have 2 minutes.
And moving forward, those 8 minutes go by pretty quickly, don't they? And that's exactly what it's like in a real life crisis. It just hits you all at once. So for the final update, it's 3 days after the election, and shots are fired as two opposing groups of protesters clash in Michigan. There are multiple fatalities. In early reporting, some right-wing outlets claim Antifa protesters opened fire on pro-Trump protesters. CNN and Reuters report that two high-profile Muslim American activists are among the dead. And President Trump, of course, loves to tweet. He tweets out, Antifa have stolen thousands of ballots, while local authorities continuously contradict this. So we are going to give you, again, about 8-ish minutes to work in your groups on update 3, and then we will come back and do some discussion questions. If you have questions throughout, please be sure to drop them into the Q&A box, and for those and I will try our best to help you in terms of logistic help, content help, not so much. So see you back in a little bit.
This is your 2-minute warning, folks. After this, we're going to come back and have a discussion. So you have 2 more minutes to work with your team.
All right, so we've gone through 3 different updates of a crisis that we truly hope to avoid come elections. So let us move into discussion questions. Go ahead and drop into either the chat box or the Q&A box. What were things that you didn't expect that would happen? Were there any updates that were particularly difficult to you? Were there any skills that you didn't think that you would need but were surprised by? I know the first time I went through a crisis, I didn't realize how much back-end work had to happen and how much communication between my team members had to go down. So if you can just go ahead and drop that into the chat box.
So Sabiha just dropped into the chat. I found it difficult to address the question of how to condemn violence without criminalizing activists. Framing is so tricky in this terrain on each of these scenarios. How much time do you give to messaging frames? This is a really good question. Messaging is often the thing that takes quite a long time to sort out. And there can be this tension between wanting to be perfect and also the urgency of getting messaging out there. So one of the things that we do is that we think through messaging ahead of time and have a set of like messaging guidance that we use as our compass, even when a crisis unfolds. In terms of condemnation, Sabiha, as you know, condemnation is extremely tricky, especially in the Masa community. And so usually you want to think about like especially in like the aftermath of violence, of what kind of solidarity message do you want to bring, particularly as a messenger and as a spokesperson in the media. And like understanding really like who your audience is and how that message will come across. So I saw some of this conversation happening in your Google Docs of, you know, if we do this, we're actually going to alienate members of the audience that we really want to draw in. So those are really important questions and conversations to have as a team when you're going to go out and have folks disseminating messaging to the general public. I see that Dana has dropped in the ability to put something out that is very important and will live online forever in the space of a few hours is a challenge. Yes, for sure. We all have seen people tweet or post things from organizations or individual accounts that they regret later because they said something that was inappropriate, or not aligned with messaging guidance from the rest of their colleagues. An example I'll share recently is that with the announcement of Kamala Harris's vice presidency nomination, there was someone on what we call Muslim Twitter who posted about how it would bring this spiciness to the White House, which is completely inappropriate, right? It's misogynistic, it's inappropriate, but it was meant to be this thing of, oh, now we're going to have some cultural representation. That is not the kind of messaging that you want to put out there for something like that. And if that person had thought about how it will live on and how it will come across, maybe they would have thought twice before putting that kind of tweet in the ether. I see Albert has posted sequencing. Who talks when can be very important, but so hard to manage in the moment. Yes, for sure. It seems like there's like a million pieces moving at the same time. Who is being deployed where? One of the things we talk about is having someone who's going to be your triaging nurse, who is thinking about requests coming in the door and who is thinking about what's going out the door. Someone has to have a bird's eye view of what's happening and then not involved in sort of the nitty gritty of, are they writing talking points? Are they, working on a graphic? Are they fielding, requests or phone calls that are coming into the organization? Someone needs to be taking a look at how the parts are moving in concert with each other and seeing where there may be gaps, or if someone is getting, there's too many things on their plate and there needs to be a decision made about what's a priority and what's not a priority. Other questions that folks have? Otherwise, we have some questions to get you thinking about other aspects of the simulation.
Was there a particular hour that you struggled with the most?
Or on the flip side, an hour that you found easier? Okay, so Dana's saying the second hour was easier. Why do you say that?
Oh, I think that might be in response to the harder.
Oh, I meant harder. Okay. It was harder? What makes it harder than the first phase? Were there things that were unexpected? Building on a message without making it repetitive? So this is actually a good point to think about. Is a message being repetitive a bad thing? In terms of comms, one of the things that we stress to folks is that repetition is actually important for people to internalize and digest a message. When you think about, pundits or commentators, or folks who are columnists in publications, they have a set of messages that define their stance on an issue. And whenever they go out there, they're delivering some variation of that same message consistently. So repeating a message, particularly in a moment that's unfolding rapidly, where there's a lot of information coming at you and there's conflicting things, a message that is strong, that is repeated, is actually a way of instilling trust and consistency in a moment of chaos. So if you have a message that works, you don't have to reach for a different message just because you've already said it before. There's ways of wrapping it in a slightly different language, but having the same message being repeated. It's also important to think about if you have 5 or 6 spokespeople from your organization that are going to be taking media interviews, they should all be saying some version of the same thing. Otherwise, it comes across as, well, what does this organization actually believe? If, Sarah over here says one thing and then John says something else, then there is inconsistency internally about what that organization's message and mission is.
And going off of that, it's super important that as an organization, you know who's talking and who, having very specific roles for each person. So did you take Did you take the opportunity to actually assign roles to the different folks on your team?
Dana's saying that they assigned roles on the first phase, but then it fell by the wayside. One
That's
of the things,
very real.
very real. One of the things that we like to, in a simulation, you have the luxury of, there isn't actually anything else happening. This is a hypothetical scenario with, with guardrails around it. But in a real scenario, right, you only have a certain amount of time. And there are things that you may want to do ideally, but you just don't have the time to do. And so that's really when the rubber hits the road of, okay, we want to do like 15 things, but there's only 2 people who are available to do them. And it actually is taking longer to figure out something. There's, approval that needs to happen, or someone isn't getting back to you, that it actually slows down the process more than you expected. Dana's asking, wouldn't your organization already have a triage process with approvals already set up? So you would hope and think that that is the case, but that thinking has to happen before a crisis happens. I think what often happens to folks, and we have felt this ourselves, is there is an assumption that everybody knows what that flow chart looks like. But then when you're in the midst of a crisis, everybody's already feeling tense, right? And in our case, when we respond to crises, there's often a very personal element. If there are Muslim folks involved in a crisis, it's a possibility that we may know somebody who is affected. So there is your own psychological, reactions that are happening in addition to having to professionally respond to something. So don't assume that the approval process is understood by everybody. That's a conversation that has to happen before a crisis hits you. And even if there is a system set up, sometimes that system can fall apart if someone is not there. So for instance, for us, if something has to go through our program director, but the program director was pulled in to something else, maybe they have to do an action and they're not available like via phone because they're literally speaking at a press conference, then you have to have a backup plan of, is there somebody else who can respond or who can give that approval? If somebody is actually just not there at all, let's say they were in an external meeting or they had already taken that day off, maybe their kid is sick, there's something else that came up that is, occupying their time. You have to have a way of being flexible and adapting if the like formal structure is not there as it was meant to be.
Yeah, and another really probable thing, I know that it's happened to our team, is time zones. We are lucky enough to have folks on the East Coast and the West Coast. So I'm based in DC, for those who's based in Berkeley. And something really real like Christchurch happened at midnight or 1 a.m. East Coast time. So do you have a backup plan for what happens when people are literally asleep? So making sure that you have a triage process and have a plan and several backup plans is super important. And that's something that you should think about starting now.
So we're going to share a couple of resources with you to think about how to set up that structure, or at least have some sort of thing on paper that helps guide you in a crisis, because we know nothing happens according to plan, but at least thinking about it ahead of time helps you feel more prepared. So our organization has prepared this checklist on how you can prep your organization for a media rapid response moment. And so it goes through various sort of pieces like spokespeople, like messaging, like social media. You can find a link to this in the training index that I mentioned earlier. We will drop that link again into the chat box, so it's there for you to easily access. Please go ahead and utilize that checklist, have a conversation with your staff, and schedule some time to think about how you would prepare for a crisis should it hit your organization on the issues that you work on. So we know, for instance, that the fall is going to have some weird curveballs that are going to come at us, sometimes in the topic areas that we work on. Being prepared ahead of time means that you are better equipped to respond from a place of confidence and strength when it unfolds, rather than being caught flat-footed. Two more resources that we have that we want to share with you is this messaging in a crisis document, which was put together by our team. And that includes messaging guidance and critically information about how people psychologically process messaging, which is really important to understand. This guide is derived from our experience supporting advocacy organizations who were responding to acts of mass violence. So the shooting in Christchurch is an example of a crisis that we assisted organizations to respond to. So it gives you some messaging framework specifically for progressive organizations, and how they might think about responding to a national crisis. The second document is brand new, which is called Messaging in a Crisis. I'm sorry, Managing in a Crisis. Thank you. So similar. This was written with interview responses from 13 community leaders in the US who were in senior leadership roles during major crises. And it also includes learnings and advice from current and former staff at Rethink Media who are in similar positions. I want to draw your attention specifically to pages 15 and 16 of that document, which cover the toll that crises can take on people emotionally and psychologically. So take some time to sit with this booklet. It has some really great lessons learned from people who have been in the midst of crises. And it really gets you thinking about how do you care for your staff members' well-being, both in the midst of a crisis and after a crisis, so that you can avoid burnout, and also so that we remember that it's important to take care of each other as we respond to crises, that we're not just machines who do work, but that we're real humans who are like consuming and trying to make sense of things that are happening as they're rapidly unfolding. So please take advantage of those resources. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact us. Our email addresses are here on the screen. You can also reach out to us through the Netroots app. I know that questions can vary from organization to organization, but we hope that this was a experiential learning opportunity. I know it can be stressful, but this is the best way to learn. That was what we found, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks all.